is. Okay, so we're looking at PFT 107. So this is going to be, the name of the class is Advanced Fitness Nutrition, which makes it sound like you've taken nutrition, like regular nutrition first, but it's just called Advanced Fitness Nutrition. So if you see that name and you're like, wait, I haven't taken regular nutrition yet, don't worry, that's not necessarily how it works. In fact, this is technically Advanced Nutrition 1, so you'll see Fitness Nutrition 2 as part of Capstone. And so, you know, the information is basically, like, there's only so much information that we need to cover as personal trainers when it comes to nutrition. So a lot of this will be, you know, sort of base knowledge, which is great. And so that way, like, it will actually feel somewhat familiar when you get to Capstone there. So this is going to be an 8-day class, as you can see. So you're going to have homework on days 2, 4, and 6, covering the prior 2 days of class. Today, we're going to get in sort of an introduction of nutrition. So it'll be a pretty interesting one. Then we'll have nutrition ingestion and metabolism. So this is actually where we're going to kind of come back into the ATP production side of things again. Not that you guys don't know it by now, but Lord knows we like to review here at Sochi. So you are going to get another dose of that tomorrow. Then we're going to go into macronutrients and micronutrients. Now, really quickly, I just want to say this up top. You guys are going to get all your PowerPoints today when I email them out, but sometimes people take a look at PowerPoints 3 and 4 and get a little intimidated because these are both over 100 slides. They are pretty massive PowerPoints each. But we'll be moving through them very quickly. The reason they have so many slides is because, number one, there's a lot of pictures and charts, and number two, each of the individual like vitamins gets its own like slide, and sometimes they get like 3 or 4 slides. So it's just like, it's very spaced out in this one. So it's gonna feel like a lot, but don't worry. You know, we'll move through it in sort of a normal amount of time that we normally do. Then we are going to look at nutrition consultation. This is one of my favorite lessons, actually. This is where we're going to be kind of looking at what are some of the tips and tricks that you can give your clients to sort of regulate their nutrient intake. You know, you guys have probably heard me say this before, but my favorite like piece of advice when it comes to nutrition is not so much to tell somebody like what to eat or what not to eat, which is really what like a lot of people focus on. I really like to tell people what, you know, how to kind of construct a plate in general. And so it's like, if you can make your meals as colorful as possible, get plenty of dark greens and reds and, you know, dark browns and things like that into your meals, that's going to be a really good sign that you are getting like an overall like balanced, nutritious diet. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the My Plate, which is sort of the USDA's new version of the, I say new, it's been around for a while at this point, but new version of the food pyramid for those of you who remember that. And then we'll look at like weight management. This is going to be a math day, so be aware. Day 6, math coming at you. But we are going to talk about like how to reduce some of these calories, figure out what their macronutrient intake should be, you know, how to determine like what somebody's metabolism is, how being active is going to affect that metabolism. So we will be looking at that. Then we'll also look really briefly at nutrition for special populations. So like, you know, seniors who need more calcium, youth who also need more calcium, athletes who need a higher amount of carbohydrates, things like that. And then finally, we'll review and knock out our final exam, which will, you know, encompass homeworks 1, 2, and 3. So, you know, kind of like we do in the past, this is going to push your, you know, you've got 3 homeworks to kind of go through in order to review for the same 30 questions that you would have had. So that means that before you were getting an average of like 7.5 questions from homework 1 and homework 2, both in your final. Well, in this version, you're only going to get an average of 5 questions from each homework 1, homework 2, and homework 3. So that means that there's a larger amount of content for you to review in order to prepare for the final exam. So we're kind of pushing your memorization abilities just a little bit. And yeah, that's about it. You guys have any questions about nutrition? Cool. Let's go ahead. Oh yeah, go ahead, Frankie.
I said not yet.
Oh, well, yeah, right. Well, let's see. What do we got today? 40 slides. Piece of cake. Not 100. Remember the first time ever? I actually really love it whenever we get like a new employee, like a new hire, and then like they take a look at the slides for the first time. They're like, dude. And it's like, don't worry. It moves quick. All right. Let me zoom out here. All right, so we are looking at PFT 107, Advanced Fitness Nutrition. And this is going to be PowerPoint 1. Introduction to Nutrition. So this is very much an introduction day. So I'm probably going to move through some of this pretty quickly. There's not actually a ton of this type of content that you're tested on here, because it's like, hey, you know all the basics. We just want to review all those so that we have context before moving on. But obviously we'll make it worth it. Okay. Come on, get out of the way, banner. I don't think anybody can see this banner that I'm always talking about, but it freaking blocks my it blocks my goddamn button. There we go. All right. So sports nutrition. Oh, and that's the other thing. This class is primarily focused around sports nutrition, which means like the type of nutrition for, you know, your clients. And when we say your clients, we mean like the average client that's coming into the gym, right? So this is, when we're talking about sports nutrition, we are in a very much like a specialized field, right? Like we're not just talking about like nutrition in general that applies to every single person, which isn't how nutrition works anyways, right? Like nutrition's a very like personalized thing. Like Maggie, your energy needs are very different from mine, and mine are very different from Frankie's, right? Like we're all different ages, different genders, different heights, different body fat percentages, you know, all of that. And so that, you know, when we talk about like nutrition, like the realm of what we are allowed to talk about as personal trainers is a specialized realm specific to our industry, right? Like we are not dietitians. Like we got to make that, you know, I'm sure I've already talked about that so many different times, but like we do need to make sure that there's a clear distinction there, right? Like I just had a friend come over the other day, and you know, they were asking about like what I do, and I was like, well, I train people to get ready for like their personal training certification, blah 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 blah. And they were like, okay, well I know all that, but like what does that mean? And I was like, well, basically like, you know, in the eyes of the government, a certified personal trainer is a very specific title, and so because of that, they need to regulate what goes into becoming a certified personal trainer. And so there's a set of standards, right? And those standards are, you have to do continuing education, you have to pass an exam. There are different companies that are allowed to give that exam, but they all basically cover the same type of content. And so I was like walking her through like what that process was. And she's like, well, are you allowed to talk about like nutrition? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But we're not allowed to give out specific dietary plans, because that is the role of like a dietitian. And she's like, oh, okay. So like a nutritionist is allowed to do this. And I was like, no. Like nutritionist is not something that's recognized in the eyes of the government. Like a certified personal trainer is, a dietitian is, an accountant is, you know, like there's different like levels of, you know, things that are recognized. Like you could even call yourself a wellness expert, go out there and start, you know, taking people to the gym and showing them how to exercise and kind of writing them specific, exercise programs. But if that person ever gets hurt and they decide to come after that wellness expert, I think is what I said, if they ever decide to come after that person, they don't really have very much protection, because they haven't proven in the eyes of the government that they are an expert, because there is no like certifying agency that, you know, proves them as an expert, right? So that's really what certification is. What you're doing is you're basically justifying the amount of knowledge you have. And don't get me wrong, I've known certified personal trainers who are big dummies. And I've known people who are, you know, generally my students who have not graduated yet, who are freaking experts in the field because like they've studied really hard, they've come in with base knowledge, and you know, they know, I think you guys know a lot more than some of the certified trainers that are out there. And so I've had students who train their friends on the side, and I think that's actually great. But I always like warn them where I'm like, look, you do need to be aware of the fact that like you're not protected. Like you can train your friends, and if you trust your friends to be reasonable if something ever goes wrong, where if they get hurt, it's on them and not on you, then great, like train away, you know, like it's not illegal in California to call yourself, like to train clients without certification. You just can't call yourself a certified personal trainer. And if you ever do get into trouble, you need to have that title in order to kind of protect you. So on the same side of things, if we are looking at nutrition, you know, you are protected under the realm of like speaking about nutrition as a certified personal trainer. Like we are allowed to educate and talk about nutrition as much as we want, but you are immediately unprotected the second you step out of that realm. So if you, for instance, are training your client and your client starts complaining about the fact that, let's say they went to the doctor recently, or no, we don't want to use doctor because doctor should have said something. Maybe they didn't. But let's say they went to like an assessment place, right? They went to one of those places to get their body fat tested. And they did a DEXA scan. And, you know, one of the technicians there was like, oh man, you got low bone density. You know, and they came to you and they're like, man, I've been working so hard, but I'm still getting low bone density. And, you know, so now like your brain's starting to go, okay, well, maybe you need more vitamin D in your diet. Maybe you need to get out in the sun more often, or maybe you need to take a vitamin D supplement, or maybe you need more calcium inside of your diet. All of those things could possibly be true. And as long as you tell your client like, well, you know, bone density is related to like your calcium intake and like the amount of vitamin D that you're getting. So if you feel like you're not getting enough vitamin D in your life, maybe you could get, go for a 20-minute walk in the sun every day to get a little bit more sun exposure. Or maybe you could, you know, take a vitamin D supplement, right? Or, you know, maybe it's like you have a lack of calcium. So, you know, these foods like, you know, milk, and maybe your client's vegan, so you're like, you know, different types of almond milk are fortified with calcium. You can find calcium in a lot of different places. And obviously there's also calcium supplementation. So maybe that's a route that you could take. I've already made sure that I didn't step outside of my realm because I left it up to my client to make that decision, right? I said, you could do this, you might try this. And I gave them specific examples of things that they can do, right? I applied what we call guided self-help, right? I educated them. I'm like, well, and they might go like, well, why vitamin D? And it's like, well, vitamin D is actually the vitamin that assists in calcium absorption. So even if you have plenty of calcium in your diet, but you aren't getting enough vitamin D, your body might not be absorbing that calcium. And so you might not be utilizing it effectively. You know, like that's something that I'm sure like I'm going to deal with less, but there's definitely like a history of calcium deficiencies in my family. Like my mom has low bone density on her spine. And so it's just a very common thing that runs on that side of the family. But I moved to California and got out of Oregon. So like I haven't had bone density issues anytime I ever go to the doctor. And part of that is, you know, I'm young. Part of that is that I'm male. But like honestly, a big part of it is probably just the fact that I get more sun exposure than I used to when I lived in Rain City population, Oregon, you know? So like little things like that little bit of like education, I'm totally allowed to do that. I'm allowed to do that as much as I want. But what I'm not allowed to do is say, well, you should take a calcium supplement. You should take this vitamin supplement that I sell over here in the gift shop, you know, in the supplement shop. It's been so long since I've been to a real gym. I don't know what a gift shop is anymore. I'm kidding. I'm just going crazy. So we are talking about sports nutrition, right? Again, you are allowed to educate. We're going to make that clearer and clearer and clearer over the next few days. So let's go ahead and define our specific realm of nutrition. So sports nutrition, right, is a specialized area and practice within the field of nutrition, right? And what we mean by that is it partners closely with the study of the human body and exercise science. So it is normal nutrition information, but it pairs really well with like what we know about the body, right? So here's my biggest recommendation, Maggie, Frankie. If you can get a dietitian in your pocket, that's how I like to say it, try to do that as quickly as possible. Like nutritionists are good too, you know, like they have like their rules and regulations of what they're allowed to do. But, you know, I personally have always really liked the fact that like you kind of go to the top to get the best, you know. Find, you know, a big part of our industry is networking with other parts of industries, right? Like we talked about this in our sales class, in our business class, right? It's always good to have a dietitian. It's good to know a certain like how to get a hold of like your clients' doctors. You know, they're not a doctor within your network or anything like that. Knowing the sales team, you know, like you have a network of people that you can refer to. Like I have I have 1 or 2 massage therapists that I like send my clients to if they need like a massage, because that's outside of my depth, right? Well, same thing with my dietitian friend Rebecca. Like anytime I have like a dietitian problem, I will sort of shift that to my friend Rebecca. And so like I've worked with her for years now. And so like that's always a really handy thing to have like within your network. And so, but like looking at the similarities here, the reason I bring this up, right, is if we're talking about how like sports nutrition partners closely with the study of the human body and exercise science, there are certain things that like Rebecca and I slightly disagree on, you know, like because we have different approaches to things. She is medically trained, right? That's like what her role is, whereas I am athletically trained. And so like every now and then we will have like a slight disagreement on things. And so we'll both like kind of, you know, discuss that. And so that's a really great like person to have, because like you might go, oh, well, this is something that I read in like this specific like sports journal. And you know, you should apply like this, and this. And then like you have your dietitian friend who's like, yeah, that's actually really smart. But remember that population is blah, 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 blah. So, you know, that can be a really handy thing to have on. So we are specifically talking about like, you know, for instance, like Rebecca, if she was giving somebody like protein intake advice, right? In a generally said, and this is the number you guys are actually going to need to know. You guys are going to get intimately familiar with this number that I'm about to mention. But protein intake for sedentary individuals is 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram of body weight. So let's see here. So I weigh 79 kilograms, right? So if I were a sedentary individual, the amount of protein that I need per day, 0.8, is 63 grams. So 2 chicken breasts a day and I'm covered in protein if I'm sedentary. So that's the number you need to know. However, athletes, so sports nutrition wise, that number is going to go up much, much higher depending on what type of athlete you are. If you're an endurance athlete, you're going to need somewhere between 1.2 and 1.7. If you're a strength training athlete, you might need somewhere between 1.2 and 1.9 grams per kilogram. So, you know, there is some differences there. And that's what we mean when we say like sports nutrition. We are focusing on, you know, fueling physical activity, like carbohydrate intake. We're focusing on repairing the body with protein, and trying to optimize our athletes' performance. Whether it's your regular client who's 85 years old and coming to the gym to, you know, help with their hip pain, or, you know, a high school football player who is trying to like get an edge in their like sport, you know, it doesn't matter. Either way, you are applying sports nutrition. All right, so there's our definition. Let's go ahead and do. Oh yeah, go ahead, Frankie.
So that, like, I was always taught that it was like 1 gram, like for athlete, like 1 gram per 1 pound.
Per pound, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the old classic, man.
Okay.
So yes. So let's see here. NASM protein recommendations. Let's see if I can find this chart. This is actually going to be in our slides later.
Okay.
But yeah, there it is. This is going to be in our slides. I don't think it's today, so I don't want to go searching for it. So Google is my friend. So this is actually our protein intakes according to NASM.
Okay.
So that's going to be 0.8 grams, and this is per kilogram of body weight. That's about 0.4 per pound, which is way less than 1 gram per pound, right?
For
Um,
sure. Yeah.
Strength athletes, 1.2 to 1.7. So here's the poundage, right? 0.5 to 0.8. So the highest you're really going to go. And when we say strength athletes versus endurance athletes, we're looking at somebody who's like a cardio-based athlete. So this might be like a marathon runner versus a strength
Uh-huh.
athlete who is somebody who is like a, you know, like you got to honestly, power lifters need less protein intake because like power lifters don't build as much like muscle, right? They build strength. Whereas like bodybuilders, they're all about building new muscle. So that means that they're
Yeah.
creating like a lot of hypertrophic gains. So you'll need a greater amount of protein intake with them because you're destroying more protein.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny, right? So that's 0.8 per, you know, yeah. If you were to
Yeah.
look at like the difference here, right? 175 times 0.8, right? The most protein I really need is about 140 grams per day versus the normal recommendations of like 175 per day, you know? So we will be looking at that when we get to macros, but that's what's kind of funny. You do hear that general information. And I've heard, Frankie, more than that. I've heard 1.5 pounds or 1.5 grams per pound. I've heard 2 grams per pound.
Yeah. I've heard 1 and 1.5. And I was like, but even that now looking at it is a lot.
Right. And so you kind of think, well, and then you start to go into like your knowledge of how nutrition works. And you start to realize like kind of, you know, the idea was when like that big protein intake came in, I think a big part of the reason is because people have like a very base knowledge of like what protein is. It's like they think protein comes in and your body goes, oh, that's perfect. Let's build some new muscle, you know? But there's a limiting factor on how much, you know, muscle you can actually build at one time. That's a limiting factor, you know, like you can only gain so much muscle mass. Your body can only do so much cellular repair, you know? But at the same time, there's also, you know, what happens to all that excess protein? Like if your body just brings in a bunch of protein and can't do anything with it, you know what your body's going to do? It's going to convert it to carbohydrates. It's going to use gluconeogenesis to be like, well, I like carbs for metabolism, so I'm just going to turn that protein into a carb. And then all of a sudden you're left with all this extra nitrogen that your body has to process and pee out, basically. And that's where if you've ever heard somebody say like, oh, too high of a protein diet is hard on your kidneys. Have you ever heard that? Some
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
sometimes you'll hear people say stuff like that, and then like that's not necessarily true. Like just because it works more doesn't mean it's working harder. You know, like you haven't damaged your kidneys; you're just making them work more often. They're designed to be able to do this, so it's not fair to say that it damages your kidneys. However, flipping it again, the minute you have actual kidney dysfunction because maybe of something else inside of your body, and now you're also making those kidneys process a bunch of urea, now you are in trouble, right? Now you are asking for like kidney damage. So if you already have like hypertension or something like that, which makes your kidneys work actually harder, and you're on a high protein diet, now you are risking injury, you know? And this is, you know, there's a lot of stuff, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the world of nutrition. So, and there's a lot of bad information about nutrition that's out there. This is where I just said bad, which is going to totally counteract my point. But this is where one thing that like always happens. Nutrition is a lot of people's like some people's like favorite classes, but it's also where sometimes people get to see me be like a conversation ninja. Where a lot of times we're going to get a lot, if you have these questions, please ask them. But if you're like, I heard it was good to do this, there's a lot of times where you will notice that I will redirect those questions and then like, you know, matrix style, like avoid them. Because honestly, like that is sort of how nutrition actually works. There, like I've known plenty of people who have had a lot of success on the keto diet. You will not hear me ever say that the keto diet is good or bad. It just works a certain way and has certain effects. And I think that's how the approach to nutrition we need to have, you know? We need to understand that it's just like, this has an effect on the body. If that effect is bad to you, then yeah, it's bad, you know?
Yeah. Because not everything works for everybody. So
Exactly.
yeah, like you have to be willing to try different things,
Right.
because not everything will work the same way it will work for me that it'll work for you.
Exactly. And that's what led to like personal trainers existing in the first place. You know, it used to be just these big experts in the gym who were like, well, this worked for me. And they would have people do it. And, you know, those people saw some like marginal gains and stuff. But eventually it was like, oh man, we need to have like an actual like group of people who scientifically understand what's going on. And so then the need for real certified personal trainers kind of came around. The problem is, and that's great, but the problem is like all that old information kind of still exists, and so it kind of gets mixed in every now and then, and you know there's isn't necessarily a lot of evidence that it's the best way to do things, and so now you know we live in a world full of information, so there's contradicting stuff, and it's like, well, the information that's always going to trump, you know, the information that's like the type you want to pay attention to, right, is anything that's been like peer reviewed science, right? So you have like different layers of like analyzing information. The top is going to be peer reviewed science. So like you have like a scientific explanation for something, and then a bunch of people in that field all looked at it and looked for mistakes, you know. That's what's called a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is basically like where sometimes people will take and they'll look at a million other different studies all studying the same thing, and they'll be like, okay, well, here's 500 studies, right, just a crazy high number sometimes, that all looked at consuming 1 gram of protein per pound versus consuming the USDA recommendations of 0.8 grams per kilogram, and then looking at a halfway point in between. And so like they analyze all of it, and they're like, studies found that like zero point 0.8 is too little for, you know, strength training athletes, but one did not produce significantly more gains than, you know, one 0.5. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where these numbers come from. And then like people review that who are all experts in the field. That's kind of the best information. Now, that being said, flipping it again, there's going to be a lot of flipping in this class. You're going to hear me present a lot of both sides of arguments. Plenty of people who are like, well, I've had more success eating 1 gram per pound. And it's like, I believe that that is true. Like, I'm not saying that like you can't have success doing that. What I am saying is like statistically, it is much more common for people to succeed, you know, or it's much less common for somebody to experience like greater gain. But I believe that like you did something, you know, that resulted in your successful fitness journey, you know. And that's why like I've had plenty of students who are like, well, I've done keto for the last few years and I've lost over 150 pounds. I'm like, that's great, but you know, that is, you found something that works for you. I wouldn't even argue that it's necessarily like the physiologic things that are happening in keto. You might have just found a diet that you found very easy to stick to. And there's a big part of that as well. Sometimes like it's not about physiology, sometimes it's about human habits, which is one of the fun thing that we get to talk about in this class. Actually, that's some of my favorite stuff to talk about. I love talking about like, you know, habits and things like this. Like me, like I have a passion for multitasking. I love multitasking. I feel super productive. I think it's kind of fun and challenging to figure out how to do multiple things at once. But statistically, I know that it means that things take longer. Like I believe it up here because I've read it countless times. Everybody will tell you multitasking is a bad idea. But I don't believe it in here. Like my heart of hearts disagrees, you know? And so like that's, you know, students that I've had who are passionate about keto. I think that's great. I don't think you necessarily need to lose that, because who knows, overall, it might be more effective for you, because doing something is better than doing nothing. That's a hell of an introduction. That is, I just summed up this whole 8 days. This is such a like opinionated class. This is gonna get real personal. Like nutrition is very personal to people. And so like this is like a fun class full of debate and stuff. But that whole breakdown right there really kind of summed up this whole next 8 days. All right, so we are going to command general nutrition information, right? General nutrition, general exercise science, knowledge about how those two are intertwined and how to apply those concepts, right? So that is what leads us to, I did kind of get ahead of it actually. That is what leads us to what's called an evidence-based practitioner. And an evidence-based practitioner is going to rely on information and guidelines which have been proven safe through effective research, right? So these are people who have like, you know, they put a bunch of people on a diet super high in protein, and they saw, you know, did they have any like negative effects, right? That's evidence based like practice, right? They put it into practice and they are observing the evidence, right? So, you know, these are people who need to have like a specific, you know, we are part of this evidence-based practitioner group. We need to have appropriate education and certification, which is why like we're trying to be very clear about defining like what does our education entail, what does our certification entail. We are in a box. We are in a very specific box of in a specific field, right? So we are going to have hands-on experience working with athletes, and then you will see like an evidence-based practitioner sometimes has experience in developing individualized dietary plans. So now we're looking more at like nutritionists, right? Like, I'm sorry, dietitians, right? Dietitians are specifically allowed to write diet plans. And so you might be wondering like, well, why can't I write a diet plan? It's like, it's not that you can't. You are absolutely allowed to write a diet plan. What you are not allowed to do is tell someone to adhere to it. You can give someone an example and say, here's a really good example of like a healthy meal plan, right? Like I could look that up right now and find 150 examples, right? Example bodybuilding meal plan, right? Images, just because I want to make this fast. Boom, there we go. Here's a really good example of a dietary. Oh, okay, come on. Why does it always do that? So for breakfast, you're going to get 700 calories there. Morning snack of 100, 600 for lunch. What's that a total of? That's annoying. So 2,600 calorie diet. It's not bad. It's, you know, 170 grams of protein. That's actually really close to something that would work for me. 294 grams of carbs and 83 grams of fat. It's a little high on the protein, right? But this is like a classic meal plan here. And it's like a chicken breast and veggies and egg noodles, a banana, some berries, you know, a workout shake, and then like a burger. Yeah, it's not bad. I like this is actually a fairly healthy meal plan. And so like if you were to create, oh, there is a total right there. If you were to create something like this and give it to your client as an example, that's well within your rights. You can do that safely, and that is not considered dangerous. What you are not allowed to do is say, Maggie, I want you to eat this. Right? Like this is your meal plan every day. You are going to do this, right? That right there is stepping outside of our realm. And the reason why that's stepping outside of our realm is because I am prescribing for you what to eat. In our country, food is considered medicine. In the United States, food is considered medicine. And so when you tell someone what to eat, you are prescribing them basically medicine, which we are not allowed to do. We're not medically trained, right? Dietitians are. Nutritionists as well. They're not allowed to either.
That is way too much food. I wouldn't even begin to be able to start with any of that. That's too much. That's too much food.
You know, it's funny. This is 600 calories short of how many calories I burned yesterday on just chest day, and I got legs today.
That is too many meals. I would be full after lunch.
Right, which is kind of the trick though to dieting, right? Like feeling full consistently so that you don't overeat. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, 2,600 calories is like a lot. If you're not burning that much energy. All right, so let's really quickly review like what we're talking about when we talk about nutrients, right? Nutrients are vital to the human body for producing energy and contributing to the growth of tissues, right? They also help us regulate body processes. So when we say nutrients, right, we're talking about carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water, right? So if we talk about like producing energy, obviously carbohydrates are really a big important part of that. By getting enough B vitamins in your diet, you're going to unlock the ability to use those carbohydrates and fat more effectively. Contributes to the growth and development of tissues, right? Protein is actually going to repair your body if you have damaged it, right? So by exercising regularly, remember, you're not building muscle in the gym, you're tearing your muscle down. And so, you know, eating new protein can help like grow that tissue. It can help regulate body processes. For instance, like again, B vitamins assisting in energy production or calcium assisting in bone density. And it can prevent deficiencies or degenerative diseases, right? If we look at like, you know, why calcium is so important, like in, you know, enhancing your bone density. If you lose that bone density, you have a condition that we call osteoporosis, where your bones are not as dense as they should be, and you are more prone to like different types of fractures and stuff. You might have like a hormonal deficiency because maybe you are on a super low fat diet. So nutrients are obviously a big part of this. And so we definitely have the term that you're going to see a lot, which is essential nutrients. And you guys have heard me say this before, but anytime you hear the word essential when we are talking about like biology or physiology or exercise science or anything like that, anytime you see the word essential, it means that it is essential that you eat them, right? It is essential that this is part of your diet. So essential nutrients are going to be our nutrients that must be obtained from the diet and are necessary for the proper functioning of the body, right? So, you know, if we look at how like fat is an essential nutrient, right? Every cell inside of your body has to have like a plasma membrane around the outside of it. And so it needs fat in order to be able to get that. That's why we have our essential fatty acids. You have your omega-3s and your omega-6s. It's really important that you eat them. But there are other omegas, right? Like you have omega-9s. If you look at omega-9 fatty acids, these are two things that also exist, right? We don't talk about them quite as often, and you can get them from their diet. But what's kind of cool about like your omega-9 fatty acids is that your body is pretty good at kind of producing them actually. If you got plenty of omega-3s and plenty of omega-6s in your diet, and you are somehow, I don't know how you would actually ever have this happen. If you are getting plenty of omega-3s and 6s, you're getting plenty of 9s. But let's say somehow you are 9 deficient, right? Well, you got 3s and you got 6s, your body can break those down and reconstitute them and make that 9. And now suddenly you have all the nutrients you need. You have all the different fatty acids that you need. So it is essential that 3s and 6s are obtained by your diet because your body can't make those. 9 is not considered as essential because your body can constitute it itself. Your body is like, well, we're short on this. And then your body goes, okay, well, I'll make some. But omega-3s and 6s have to be obtained from your diet. You need to get those in your diet because we can't make those ourselves. This is where we're definitely gonna hear this term a lot when we talk about amino acids. Your body's pretty good at breaking down amino acids and creating its own versions, but it can't do that with some of the essential amino acids. Therefore, it is essential that you consume them in your diet in order to be able to have them. So when we're talking about like, I said essential nutrition, essential nutrients. What we're talking about when we say essential nutrients is we are talking about our macronutrients, which are going to be nutrients that are required in large quantities every day, right? So your macronutrients are the ones that you need a lot of, right? We usually typically measure these in grams per day, which is a fairly, I mean, doesn't sound like a lot, but a gram is a fairly large unit of measurement when it comes to nutrition. So these are going to be your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, right? Then we have our micronutrients, which are going to be your nutrients that are required in small amounts daily, right? So typically we measure these in milligrams or micrograms, and then these are going to be your vitamins and minerals, and then you have water, which is arguably the most essential nutrient. Is definitely the most essential nutrient that you require. The most essential nutrient, allows for metabolism to efficiently occur. You know, you need to make sure that you have plenty of water in your diet. So we're going to get a little bit of information about carbohydrates out of the way right now. We are actually going to have an entire day. We're going to have an entire day talking about carbohydrates and proteins and fats. We're going to have a whole big macronutrient day. But again, that PowerPoint is massive. So we're going to get some of the information out of the way now, which will make that a little bit easier to swallow in the future. So let's go ahead and look at carbohydrates. Like, what is a carbohydrate? You guys have heard me say this before, but now we're actually kind of breaking it down. But basically, carbohydrates are compounds that are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules, right? So if we look at a carbohydrate, you are going to see its chemical structure: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. You don't see any other letters in here, right? Those are the only things that make up carbohydrates. And so when we're looking at it, that's what a molecule of glucose actually looks like, right? So carbohydrates are converted into glucose, and then that glucose is used for ATP production for fuel inside of the body, right? So the way I always like to say this is they are big, complex chains of single sugar molecules, right? So you have a whole bunch of single sugar molecules such as glucose, and they're all stacked together in these big, long, complicated chains. And they form like different various versions, right? Like if we look at fructose, right? You can see fructose, you've got glucose, which is here, and fructose, which is here. It's fairly similar, right? Put them together and that gives you sucrose. And sucrose is going to be the thing that we find in like kind of your classic like sugar, right? But if you look at like cellulose, for instance, right? Oh, good. Cellulose is really kind of stacked really interestingly together. And what's cool about cellulose is it's actually so good at I'm just not going to be able to get this picture. It's actually so good at stacking. Okay, cool. Stacking itself together efficiently that you can see like these big complex chains, and look at how little space there is between all of these, right? That is why cellulose can't be broken down. This is more commonly referred to as fiber. So when you consume cellulose, your body like tries to eat it and it tries to digest it with all its enzymes and acids and all of this churning and chewing and all this stuff. And it just can't. The molecules are just way too stacked together too efficiently. And so what ends up happening is it kind of goes through your digestive tract uninterrupted and comes out the other end. That is what fiber does. And that's why like fiber, you'll hear people describe it as like it cleanses your system out. You know, I don't like to use the word cleanse that much, but that is essentially what fiber does, right? It pulls all the excess junk that might be sitting in your digestive tract out of your body. So all of those are examples of carbohydrates. We'll be looking at more examples of that later. You've also got proteins, which are going to be amino acids that are made up, or actually we're going to say complex chains of amino acids, right? And what is an amino acid, right? An amino acid is a compound just like glucose, a compound made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So nitrogen is actually the special little bit that you're going to find in amino acids that you aren't going to find in carbohydrates, right? And so if we look at an amino acid structure, and this is what's cool about proteins, right? Proteins in general, they make up this is kind of how we like to draw them. I love drawing proteins, by the way, because it's the only thing I can draw because they're big squigglies. You can see, man, what a freaking great picture. I'm glad this is up here. Each of these represents a different amino acid, of which there are 20, by the way. There's 20 amino acids that exist. And so if you look at this, right, depending on what order this is in, this might be like a tissue of skin, right? This might be the protein that makes up skin. But if you were to like switch the order here, like if you were to take this little turquoise guy over here and just move it to the end and take that purple guy there and put it in its place, you would have a totally different protein. That order would change, and therefore you would have a different protein. So now, rather than being like a skin molecule, this might be like an enzyme inside of your saliva, right? So that's what like proteins are. They're these big complex chains of these little amino acids here. Now, what is an amino acid? Well, like I said, you got 20 of them. They look like this. And you'll notice each of their structures are slightly different, but they all still have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And that nitrogen is actually what gives each amino acid its unique structure. So if we look at like an amino acid here, this is kind of a general amino acid. This is this is a very general picture here of an amino acid. There we go. Great. So if you look at it, right, we got hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, but then you see this little R group right here. That is what we call a side chain, or sometimes it's known as like an R group. And you see a little nitrogen here. And what happens is if you were to zoom in on this, you would find all these ingredients again, but they would all be in kind of a different order. And so that's where you get all the each individual unique amino acids, right? They're unique because like their side chain is shaped differently than each other, right? Like proline's side chain looks different from valaine's, which looks different from arginine, which looks different from glycine. All of those little side chains are just unique from each other, and that's what gives them a unique structure. And when they all come together, they make different proteins, right? So every protein is going to be a chain of amino acids. Now, in the body of like an animal, your body needs all 20 amino acids in order to be able to make its tissues, right? So tissue inside of like a living organism is made up of all 20 amino acids. But you're going to find different proteins in plant sources as well. They've got proteins as well. However, their proteins are kind of unique. They don't necessarily have super high levels of certain amino acids. They might be missing one or another, right? And so that's where you have what are called your essential amino acids. And so you can see these dotted line ones here, these are what we call essential amino acids, whereas these are non-essential. And so your body cannot make a new protein without all of these amino acids present. But let's say you consumed a food, or let's say your body has all the amino acids except for aspartic acid. Okay, it's missing this one, right? Now this is a non-essential amino acid. So your body wants to make some new tissue. Like you went to the gym, you worked out, and it wants to make like new muscle in order to like grow your body, right? Well, it has all the amino acids to be able to do that, but it's missing aspartic acid. It's got all the amino acids except this one. Well, what your body can do is it might be able to break down a little bit of like arginine and glutamic acid and reconstitute the ingredients from that and create aspartic acid. Now you've got all 20 ingredients. Now your body can start working. The way I always like to think of it is it's like your body is like a really picky chef. Now the chef can make literally anything as long as it has 20 ingredients. As long as this chef has these 20 ingredients in front of him, he can start working. But he can make some of those ingredients. He can't make certain ones, right? Like think of it as like aspartic acid is garlic salt, right? And then isoleucine is garlic and leucine is salt. These cannot be created, but if you take this plus this, you get this, right? That's how I always like to think about it in my head. And so that is sort of like what we talk about. By the way, like these are actually not at all related to this. These are color coordinated because they do actually have different other things in them. And so I'm pretty sure this guide is actually not even a nutrition guide. I think this is actually probably like a cooking guide. But regardless, I love this chart. And they do have like different things. So for instance, actually, where is it? Yeah, glutamic acid here. This is a really great amino acid. A really tasty one, actually. You guys ever hear of like MSG, right? It's an ingredient that you always hear people say is like, actually, it's like, oh, it's really bad for you. It gives you headaches and this and that. that's an interesting thing. You are not going to hear me say MSG is bad for you or good for you, but what I will say is MSG stands for monosodium glutamate, and it is where you take a single molecule of sodium and combine it to glutamic acid. That's the amino acid. That's one of the reasons why it tastes so good is your body, your taste buds go, what is that, sodium? I love sodium. I use that to make electricity. And your body goes, what is that, glutamic acid? That's great. I use that to make proteins. So your body thinks that it tastes really good because it's giving it two things that it really needs. So your body then makes it taste really good. And that's why MSG is a flavor additive. Your body goes, yeah, I love those things. Give me more of that. But there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that it's actually unhealthy for you. That is a very common myth that was like created way back in the day. And the history of it's really fascinating and tied to some political stuff, which is why I'm going to stop talking about it. If you want to know, text me. You have non-essential amino acids, which your body can create, and you have essential amino acids that your body cannot. We will go ahead and look at that in later classes. And then we also have fats. Fats are actually made of the same ingredients as carbohydrates, but they are in a very different order. So fats are compounds made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But they are going to be in a very different order, right? So if we look at like a fat molecule, here are some general examples of that. You can see these form these really interesting kind of big, long lines right here. So this, you can see, is actually a molecule of what we call glycerol. And then you can see these three chains right here. This is a triglyceride. This is actually sort of what that looks like in the end. And this is how your body actually stores fat. You have what are called adipocytes, which are basically fat cells. Well, they are fat cells. They're not basically fat cells. They are fat cells. And what they are really good at doing is storing those triglycerides inside of their outer shell. So they're kind of like a normal cell. Like they have all the normal stuff a cell is going to have, right? They have a nucleus and mitochondria, but they also have this kind of big empty sac here. And that big empty sac stores triglycerides. Trying to find, I mean, this is saying it, and that's great and all, but I want to find a picture with all the little tails inside. No? All right, well, we got one in a PowerPoint coming up later. So that is an example of one type of fat, right? Those are triglycerides. You also have phospholipids. Phospholipids are going to be like basically like diglycerides. So you'll see like phospholipids look like this. And that's a two-chain fat molecule, right? So you see like the little thing here with like two little tails, right? So you see this guy's got three tails, right? Well, a phospholipid is going to have two tails. And that is actually what makes up your cell walls, right? So this is exactly what the walls of all of your cells look like. This is what we call a phospholipid bilayer. There are two layers of phospholipids, and that's what keeps water outside of your cells and keeps water inside of your cells. And then whenever your body wants to let like a little bit of sodium in, it can maybe open up a channel, let that sodium rush in, and then it can close afterwards. And that's why water is so necessary. It allows nutrients to move into and out of your cells there. But fat is what keeps that water from just mixing constantly. So this is why we have different cells and all their interesting little structures there. And then you've got cholesterol, which is actually a single fat molecule. And it is a precursor to things like hormones, cholesterol is actually what allows your body to kind of carry fat molecules around. And it's very interesting and like gives us a lot of different physiologic processes. Now, we've also got vitamins. Vitamins are going to be a big part of nutrition. So if we're looking at it, vitamins are going to be nutrients containing carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, a little bit of nitrogen, which is great, and other elements. So we're finally going to get some other stuff inside of the body, right? Rather than just those 4 ingredients. And so what vitamins allow you to do is it allows your body to do a lot of other interesting physiologic processes, right? Like calcium is going to be an example of a mineral, right? Well, vitamin D, which might have like you know, a little bit of like phosphorus inside of it, is actually going to allow that calcium, because calcium phosphate, those things like to bind together. Now you've also got phosphorus as another mineral, right? That needs to be consumed inside of your diet. Well, vitamin D has a little bit of both of those things in it. And so it actually allows those 2 things to bind together more effectively, therefore creating new bone tissue inside of your body. So vitamins are really, really cool. These need to be consumed exogenously, which means that like you need to consume them in your diet. You need to get them from over there into here. And so those are your vitamins, right? They allow your body to do specific physiologic processes, right? So they allow certain physiologic processes to occur, right? And then you got minerals, which are also inorganic. These are nutrients made up of a variety of elements. So if you look at the periodic table and you see like a lot of those different like metals and things like that, those are the minerals we're talking about. They're inorganic nutrients. In fact, I'm going to put that up here, even though it's not in the slide. Inorganic nutrients made up of a variety of different elements, right? And so like calcium, right? I mean, again, calcium's a metal, you know? If you look at it in nature, it looks like this. Looks like friggin' iron. It's just not. And so like, you know, that's what your body uses to make bone. But when you look at calcium, and if you look at like phosphorus, it looks like this. And it's kind of this reddish metal here. But then if you look at calcium phosphates, it looks like this. It's all ground up. And now I can put that in orange juice and boom, your orange juice is fortified with calcium. Take that powder, throw it in there, and you've got a picture that was supposed to be fastly pulled up. Calcium fortified Tropicana, you know? So that's sort of how we get this. So how does your body like take those things? Well, it's going to use vitamins to allow that to happen, and then it's going to use those minerals as sort of the base, you know, elements to kind of create that. And so this is a vital for structural development of tissues, and it regulates body processes. Remember, like electrolytes, like sodium and potassium, that's how your body generates action potential. So we need to make sure that we have plenty of those. Those are minerals, right? Lastly, our most important nutrient is going to be water, right? And water is important because it's going to help. It's the most essential nutrient, right? Which we already kind of said up here, but consisting of hydrogen and oxygen to allow for the process of hydrolysis. Remember, hydrolysis is how we break stuff up, and then how we build stuff up is through the process of like dehydration synthesis. So we are either creating water or we are sucking water, or we're using water to break stuff up, right? We cannot have metabolism without it, but obviously it also helps us regulate our temperature, lubricate our joints, and transport nutrients around the body. So those are sort of a brief rundown. That's a really brief look at all the complicated stuff that we're going to look at when we actually get to those PowerPoints. But how do we actually derive energy from all of this, right? Well, your energy is going to come from these 3 nutrients here, right? Your carbohydrates, your proteins, and your fats. Now, your body prefers carbohydrates and fats when it comes to metabolism, particularly carbohydrates, right? but that's what we call our energy nutrients, right? Like vitamins and minerals don't have any actual energy, which is why, like, I always think it's really funny whenever you see like a vitamin B supplement or like an energy drink, and it's like, it's an energy drink, it's going to give you energy, right? Like, let's look at a 0-calorie energy drink. It's kind of funny, man. Like, we just talked about how like carbohydrates are what give us energy, right? ATP production requires, is that a Bob Ross energy drink? Hold on. All right, well, this is clearly the one that we're going to look at. That's amazing. Look at all the Bob Rosses.
$8 for one?
What's that?
It's $8 for one of those things?
I guess so, yeah. That's nuts, actually. I mean, it may be nuts, but I kind of want one. And I don't even drink energy drinks. But it's kind of a misnomer, right? Like, it's kind of funny. Like, there's, well, I mean, I can't see the nutrition facts here. Bob Ross energy drink nutrition facts. Give me the nutrition facts panel. There it is. Oh God, it's bright blue. Random flavors. All right, here we go. So if you look, okay, so this does actually have calories in it. So this does have calories. This is 41 grams of carbohydrates. This is 40 grams of sugar in this can. Holy crap. But really what makes it like an energy drink, quote unquote, is it has like a ton of like niacin, which is a B vitamin, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, but pantothenic acid, which is a B vitamin, I can't remember which one. But all of these things, then there's probably like a ton of caffeine in there as well, right? So if we look at like a 0-calorie energy drink, you know, if it doesn't have any calories, a calorie is a unit of energy, right? So technically this doesn't have any actual energy of its own. So why are they allowed to call it an energy drink? Well, it does have a whole, oh God, there's another, just show me a 0-calorie one. So where is it getting all that? Why is it called an energy drink? Because it does have, freaking thing. Can the internet just not help me out today? There we go. It does have a whole bunch of like B vitamins inside of it and caffeine. So caffeine interrupts your body's ability to bind to molecules of adenine, which is a molecule that like tells your brain to get sleepy. So it's blocking your ability to get sleepy. Meanwhile, it's giving you a whole bunch of B vitamins, which allow your body to like produce metabolism. But like, if you don't have enough like carbohydrates in your diet, if you're not getting enough like calories in your diet, and you're not getting enough like water in your diet, I know there's some in the energy drink, don't get me wrong, but like you need actual water. You can't produce hydrolysis, you can't metabolize all those carbohydrates that you're consuming, and that energy drink is not really going to do much for you except give you like a little bit of like a stimulation to your brain. So it might make you think you're more energized, and your brain can be fooled into thinking that it has like a lot of, it can produce like endorphins, which will make you feel positive, but it won't necessarily actually give you any energy. So that's what's kind of funny about energy drinks. You need to support it with the actual energy molecules, right? Which are going to be carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. All that's going to come down to producing ATP, right? When we say like it's an energy producing food, we mean it's a type of food that will be broken down to produce ATP, right? So ATP is the molecule that serves as the body's direct source of energy for cellular work, right? We can't necessarily just break stuff down into energy directly. We need to have like a stable molecule that we can store energy as, and that's where we get ATP molecules from, right? So it's made by breaking food into its smaller components and then going through a process to turn that into molecules of adenosine triphosphate. So that's what we're talking about there. Now, some terms that we're going to see, and I'm going to put these in your notes later. I think we're going to see them tomorrow. When we are talking about like these nutrients, right, we need to talk about like what levels are safe or what levels are necessary for our clients to consume. So we have a labeling system for doing this. And this is something you guys are going to want to, you know what? I will actually put these in your notes. That'll make the next part easier. These labels are what like when we looked at that nutrition label just a second ago, right? If you look at like a nutrition facts panel, these are what we call your DRIs, your dietary reference intakes, right? So where it says like, it has how much fat is in it, right? But then that says that's 10% of your intake per day, right? That 10% there is what we call an RDA, which is a type of DRI. So a DRI is a dietary reference intake, and RDA is a recommended dietary allowance. So when it says like, hey, you should, this is 10% of how much we recommend you get per day, great. You don't want to go over that. You don't want to go below that, right? But obviously we can't be perfect every day. So we've got a couple other terms here as well, which are going to be like your adequate intake, which is like the minimum, your tolerable upper intake, which is like the maximum, and then the estimated average requirement, which is like, well, what if I'm old? You know, what if I need more calcium than the average person? Great, that's the estimated average requirement. That's required for your population. So I'm gonna get these first two here out of the way real quick. Dietary reference intakes, right? So what is a dietary reference intake? It is a new way to quantify nutrient needs and excesses for healthy individuals. So we used to just have the recommended dietary allowance. We used to just have your RDAs. Actually, Maggie and Frankie, you guys might remember like these things being called RDAs when you were taught about nutrition in school. Like the old food pyramid was based on the RDAs. But the problem with them is that they didn't take into account people's specific individual needs. You know what I mean? That's where, oops, hold on, this needs to be bullet pointed. That's where we needed like a new system that came, which is the DRIs. DRIs are a new way that we take into account more specific populations. And so the RDA still exists. This is still part of that. But now it's like the DRI is the umbrella term, and an RDA is like a small version that falls within it. So the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA. Oh, and that reminds me, I need to put DRI up here. Is going to be the average daily dietary intake level that is sufficient to meet the needs of a healthy population. So a recommended dietary allowance is like how much you need if you're just a normal, average, healthy person, right? That's an RDA. But a DRI has like more specific versions, right? For instance, you're going to see the EAR, that's the estimated average requirement. That's when we start talking about specific populations. So the estimated average requirement is going to be the daily intake level of a vitamin or mineral. Where is it? For a specific, to meet the needs of at least half of a population of individuals in a specific age or gender group. Okay, so that's where you get the estimated average requirement, the EAR, right? And what that is that's the needs to meet at least half the population. So you're at least meeting the average, right? 51%. So like, for instance, like senior females need a little more calcium than, I just keep talking about calcium all day today. It's just the quickest example. But they need a higher amount of calcium than most of another population, right? And that's because like hormone deficiencies create like a loss of calcium, right? And so there needs to be more of it in the diet there. So the estimated average requirement looks at that specific population, and you know, as long as it meets at least half of that needs, that's the EAR, right? At least 51, well, a little bit over half, 51%, right? And then you have the adequate intake level, okay? So the adequate intake, or AI, is going to be intake recommendation when insufficient. Oh my God, not. I can't type today. I cannot type the word recommendation. When insufficient evidence is available to calculate the EAR or RDA. Okay, and what that means is this is the minimum amount required by a population. So they can't necessarily figure out exactly how much is healthy to get, but they do know how much is like the bare minimum. And that's where we get an adequate intake level. And then we have the exact opposite of that, which is the tolerable upper intake level. Tolerable upper intake level, or UL. And that is going to be the highest level of nutrient intake that poses no adverse health effects for almost all of a general population. I believe 98% is what they look for. And so it's like, well, how much sodium am I allowed to have? And it's like 1,200 milligrams a day. Try not to go over that. That's your tolerable upper intake level. Could you go over that? Yeah, of course, you know. But in general, that's what we want to get. So those are what are called your DRIs. Those are your dietary reference intakes. I don't necessarily need you guys to have all of these memorized, although, well, I don't need you to have them all memorized to pass your regular NASM. However, remember, you guys are also taking a nutrition certification as part of your SOCHI, right? This information will probably not be on your regular test, but it probably will be on your advanced nutrition certification. So the FNS test that you're going to take, you might see these things, which is why you're going to want to keep these notes forever. Well, you're going to want to keep these notes until you pass your test, because that one is open book. So you are allowed to take that one from home. You can look this stuff up. This is a classic example, and I'm going to tell you guys the same thing when we get to vitamins and minerals. You don't necessarily have to have all your vitamins and minerals memorized. Like, where's vitamin A found? What does it do? Those two things are not really that important to memorize because you can look those up. And also, it's not really our job to tell clients to get more vitamin A in their diet. But you might get a question related to it on your test. So that's one that makes like a really good flashcard that you can like pull up while you're taking your test, where it's like, you get a question where it goes, which of the 4 following foods would be a really good source of vitamin A? And like, boom, you can look on a list that you have in your notes. Memorizing that stuff takes up brain space that I think is valuable and used for other things. But being able to look it up, that's handy. All right. Now, one other thing we need to be able to talk about, if we are talking about nutrition and we are talking about nutrients, we got to talk about the difference between enrichment and fortified. So these are 2 terms that you're going to see a lot in foods. And so enrichment is where it's the addition of vitamins or minerals to refined products in order to increase their nutritional value. So here's something that kind of sucks about food here in the US, but is also kind of a good thing. Frankie and Maggie, let's take a little survey here since we got 2 of you guys. Do you think that people should be able to get all their vitamins and minerals from their foods?
Yes.
Sure. I think I can get behind that. I agree with that. Do you think that people should do that through eating healthy foods?
Yes.
Cool. Do you think that people do?
Nope.
Right. And now, do you think that food companies should hedge their bets to keep people around because they know that it is within human nature not to get their nutrition from food?
Wait, say it again.
Do you think that nutrition companies should try to help people get the nutrition from food because they know that they probably don't?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. This is where the
Yeah.
last one gets a little tough, because like a lot of people want organic, non-refined foods, and I think that's great. I think you should absolutely strive to eat unrefined foods, but at the same time, I'm really glad that enriched foods exist because there are so many refined foods. So I'm going to give you a classic example here. Let's see here, Fruit Loops. Enriched. Sorry, fortified. Frosty Flakes. That's not the tiger. What happened to Tony? Here we go. So take a look here. This is an older label, but it's one that I can actually see. I mean, I think it says it. Yeah, you can see it all over the place. But that old one has it really, 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 really clearly. So take a look here at this food label, right? It says fortified with 10 essential vitamins and minerals. You can get your vitamins and minerals from eating Fruit Loops.
Right? That's funny. Yeah.
Take a look here. It has 100% of the recommended vitamin C in a day, right? And it's not just Fruit Loops. I can look at Cocoa Puffs, fortified. Bam. Oh, I went to Target. Okay. Well, regardless, it'll say it. Where does it say it? It's got to say it somewhere. Naturally. Oh my God, what is up with this? Naturally flavored. There we go. You know what? Actually, they actually have kind of stopped pulling that one off of this one. Interesting. I didn't see an example on that one. Here's an older label. Yeah, 12 vitamins and minerals from Cocoa Puffs. So they're still doing this, by the way. They are still doing this. They are just maybe wising up to the fact that people are not interested in getting their vitamins and minerals from kids' cereal. So, is it because Cocoa Puffs have a lot of vitamins in them? No, it's because they've gone through a process that we call enrichment or through a process called fortification. So enrichment is actually adding vitamins and minerals to a food that already has that vitamin or mineral present. They're just enriching how much you will find inside of it. So enrichment adds vitamins or minerals to a food that already has low levels of that vitamin or mineral. So when you see the word like enriched with, what that means is like, well, they probably found that like, hey, peanut butter is supposed to have some iron in it, but we took that peanut butter and processed the hell out of it, and now there's no iron left. So they added some iron back in the end. That's a process called enrichment. And when people hear that, they're like, oh God, I'm never going to eat processed foods again. I don't think that's necessarily even a bad reaction. If that's how you want to feel and you want to go all organic and all natural, go for it. But in people who are eating like this type of food already and just are not getting their nutrient intake, like I'm pretty glad that enrichment exists. Now, is it as good as getting your vitamins and minerals? Well, in the eyes of the government, yes, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that your body does not process these things as efficiently. So that's what the process of enrichment is. The process of fortification is what we just saw examples of in the cereals. Fortification is the addition of vitamins or minerals to a food or beverage that did not originally contain them. So you are not going to find vitamin C in Cocoa Puffs. But if you take some vitamin C powder and drop it in the tank, well, now you will. And that's I don't even think necessarily like that evil of a thing. A lot of people, when they hear this, they get kind of reactive and they're like, oh, that's so bad. They're putting crap on our food. Well, these are kind of good things. I mean, like all of our water here in Los Angeles is fortified with fluorine. You know, we add fluorine to your tap water so that like our teeth are nice and healthy. State of Oregon actually doesn't do that. They're one of the only states that it is illegal to add fluorine to the water. And, you know, a lot of people are like, yeah, natural water. And then there's kind of people like me who are like, yeah, but we have a lot of cavities in the state of Oregon. Some of the highest in the entire country. So, you know, there is definitely debate on both sides of these things. And I want you to be aware of them, but I'm not necessarily going to weigh in on the debate. All right. So basic nutrient guidelines. So we've kind of been moving slow through this PowerPoint. The next part of this is going to move super fast. So dietary guidelines, they're there. They're there to supply the public with information about like nutrients, make the public known about like benefits to the health products, as well as like recommendations that they should be getting, or at least give them the knowledge so they are aware of whatever it is they are getting. However, one thing to be aware of when we talk about nutrient guidelines, there is a difference between official DRIs and nutrition health claims. So for instance, if we look at like nutrition facts panel versus health claims, those are two very different things. And we need to be aware of it, even though because our clients probably won't be. So this is a nutrition facts panel, right? This is actually showing specifically what is found in certain foods, right? Calories, fats, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, proteins, right? How much trans fat is found. And you look at the new label, by the way, this actually, without going, you know, too political here, this is actually a big Michelle Obama thing. This new nutrition label was kind of a pet project of hers. And you can see it puts more emphasis on the things people should be paying attention to, which is serving size, right? And so like showing people specifically how much like a serving is allows them to make more health conscious decisions, right? And then calories is obviously a really big one. So it actually kind of draws your eyes to the things that are the most important and makes it a little bit easier to understand. There's also going to be some color coordination that happens eventually as well. And this is finally going into effect, although who knows, it probably got canceled again. It took years. This was supposed to go into effect back in like 2010. And it's just been sitting around for 10 years. Now, here's the thing. If we take a look, you know, companies are, well, that's actually not a big enough picture as I wanted. Let's see. Let's see if this article has something that I need. Nutrition health claims on food. Yeah, here we go. So a lot of times you're going to see things like this, made with real honey, right? Or it's 100% natural or has no high fructose corn syrup, you know? All those things are actually not bad, but those are not part of an official nutrition label, right? Those are just things that they're allowed to say. Now, they do have to be true. You know, they're not allowed to just like make stuff up entirely. But you know what one of the best ones that they're allowed to do is, let me see if I can find a picture of this somewhere. Come on. Oh man, what I'm really looking for is a food label that says, now with more so-and-so. I'm not gonna find it, but you will often see like a nutrition label that says something like, now with more fiber. And it's like, okay, then what? More fiber than when, you know? They're allowed to say stuff like that and it will draw your eye to it. That is not an official nutrition guideline, right? That is not an actual nutrient label. So, you know, the problem is we live in this world where obviously people should be allowed to say stuff that makes their health, like allows them to market their product. But a lot of times it comes at the cost of like people who don't know any better. And my parents are classic examples of this. My mom will send me nutrition labels all the time where she's like, look what I bought today, I'm being healthy. And I'll look at it and be like, because they'll say like lower sugar, and I'm like, okay, great. And then I look and it's packed full of artificial sweeteners. It doesn't say we lowered the sugar by adding artificial sweeteners on the label. It just says lower sugar, and that is something they are allowed to do. And so we need to make our clients aware of stuff like that so we can teach our clients how to effectively read these nutrition guidelines. So dietary guidelines are the actual like guidelines that you're normally going to find that are related to your DRIs. And that's the public information about like nutrient intake. However, we do need to be aware that nutrient claim or food claims and nutrient guidelines are not the same thing, right? And most people are not aware of that. So generally you want to avoid the biggest things that are related to like heart disease and hypertension, right? So that's going to be saturated fats, sodium, high amounts of cholesterol, added sugars, and then refined grains and alcohol. So, for instance, I used to think that double fiber bread was the healthiest bread you can buy, right? Because it's got the most fiber in it, right? So you look at like double fiber bread, it's brown, it's darker in color. Surely that's the healthy bread, right? This Oro wheat double fiber stuff, right? And you look at it, I should have just gone to this picture. This is exactly what I was looking for a minute ago. It says 48% of your daily value of fiber on it, right? That's cool. Great, whole grains goodness with added fiber. Now it is made from whole grains, which means that that's great, but it doesn't say anywhere that it is whole wheat. And whole wheat, whole grain is actually kind of one of the things we tend to look for in like a healthy bread, because that means that it is less refined. It does mean that it's going to have a shorter shelf life. That thing's going to expire way quicker than your other bread. But that's kind of a good thing, right? Whereas this double fiber bread means that it has been enriched with more fiber. They basically took more cellulose and added it to the bread. And that does increase your fiber intake, but it's doing it even though it is still a processed food. Does that make sense? And it says no added nonsense, That's great. That is exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. No preservatives, no artificial colors, right? Good source of fiber. All right. I don't hate, that's not necessarily the worst label in the world, but like, again, what do you mean when you say good source? That is not something that is clearly defined, but it is something that would draw someone's eye and be like, oh, I'm eating healthy. Maybe. So, so basically things you're going to look for, vegetables and whole grains, fat-free and low-fat milk. So when we are giving basic nutrition guidelines, we're advising our clients. In general, you're going to want your clients to, intake healthy fruits and vegetables, try to get as many whole grains as possible. The government's going to recommend like fat-free or low-fat milk products because milk is a really good source of calcium and our entire economy is freaking built on milk. So good Lord, the government loves milk. Do you need it? Not necessarily. You don't have to drink milk. But when it comes to the way things like on your test, it'll say I don't necessarily think milk is the healthiest thing in the world. It has a lot of added sugars in it, especially fat-free milk. And so like you're going to find some really unhealthy things that come along with milk. Now, again, it is a good source of calcium. The government loves milk, the US government in particular. We love milk in this country. So if you get a question that says, which of the following would be a healthy recommendation, and then you've got 4 options, and one of them is switch to low-fat milk, in your brain, you might be going, that can't be the right answer because milk is unhealthy. Milk is high in sugar. That is true. Whether it's unhealthy is still up for debate. And so in the eyes of the government, switching to low-fat milk is considered a healthy choice. We could debate all day whether or not that's actually true, but that is something you need to know. So that is kind of where that information sort of comes from. What happened? I switched. Oh my God. Yeah. So now the MyPlate system. This is something we're definitely going to be getting into. The MyPlate system was designed to like help people create healthier choices when it comes to like their diet plan. It is designed to replace the food pyramid. The food pyramid does actually still exist. It's just not used for anything anymore. But basically the idea is that it allows you to enjoy your food, but eat less, eat the right portions of things. And then in general, you want to make half of your plate fruits and vegetables. Oh, okay, there we go. I was like, man, we're getting a lot of recommendations. Try to switch to low-fat milk. Make at least half of your grain sources whole grains. I mean, honestly, try to make it all whole grains. Choose foods that are low in sodium and drink plenty of water instead of like soda, right? And so this is what we see. Like if you will sometimes see the MyPlate icon on certain foods. So you'll see occasionally MyPlate icon on food packages. Sometimes you'll see like foods that will actually slap this sticker on them. I'd like an example, please. Come on, internet. Oh, internet, you are just blowing it today. Occasionally you'll see somebody like slap this on, and that has like, it's like a food that has like the USDA, sticker of approval basically. But when we talk about like what the MyPlate is, this is what we're talking about. And honestly, guys, this is what I want you to kind of get super familiar with. When you are building like meal plans, ideally 50% of your meal should be fruits or vegetables. And generally vegetables should take up like a much larger part of that. About a quarter of your plate should be like healthy grains, and another quarter of your plate should be it should be protein. When we say protein, we mean like a lean protein. And then you can see, welcome to the US. Holy crap, we love dairy. So they're gonna say like a glass of like milk there. Now, I don't hate the MyPlate. I think it's really, really good. And I think it's a great way to like get people to eat healthy. And if you go to this website, choosemyplate.gov, you're actually going to find a ton of really, really great information. They have apps that will give you general nutrition advice. They have really good articles here, good examples of healthy like vegetables, good examples of like healthy lean proteins. If you go to like Eat Healthy and you talk about like eating healthy on a budget, this is one of my favorite freaking handouts that I love to give my clients. It talks about like make a grocery list, plan everything out. Understanding price tags, read the food label. Check this. This is a really great article here. There we go. There's a picture with a freaking sticker on it. And you can see like it shows like, this one says reduced sodium. What do they mean by that? Well, it reduced the sodium intake by about half, whereas everything else remained pretty much the same. So, there's some really great information here. Kitchen time savers. Oh, that's cool. So really good stuff. I've sent my clients to this website for years. There's a bunch of print materials on here. I used to have some of these for my clients, and I would like hand them out. No. Oh yeah, I've seen this one before. This is something the freaking government made. Look at this, pumpkin 5 ways. And so it's like some fun, healthy-ish pumpkin recipes. I've never looked up that one before. That's funny. But there are some really good like, dietary guidelines, right? So a lot of really cool stuff on choosemyplate.gov. I do recommend like getting somewhat familiar with that website because it's a really great resource. Remember in our sales class, we talked about how giving your client physical handouts is something that makes you seem more professional and like is more likely to keep your client coming back to you because it shows that you care. This is a great place to get some really good handouts that you can give your clients. So food labels, they are going to provide you with a whole bunch of information that allow your clients to make like wise food choices, right? They are regulated by the FDA, that is the Food and Drug Administration, right? So the FDA is responsible for making sure that those nutrition labels are true. However, it's a freaking government agency, which means it's run by people who understand the law and they have to follow the rules of the law. So if I were to put a food out there, let's say I were to start, like I'm making myself a bottle of water, right? I'm gonna start selling bottled water and I'm gonna put a nutrition label on there that says, will help. I don't know. I'm gonna put. Yeah, I'm gonna create a special type of water. I'm trying to create like a scenario in my head on the fly. I'm gonna create a special type of water, and in that water, I am going to dye it slightly blue so that it looks kind of cool. So I add a little bit of food coloring to it, and then I will add, let's say, a little bit of iron into that water. It'll be iron water. Probably a bad choice because that means it's going to rust things like crazy, but there it is. And then I say on my nutrition label, I slap a big sticker because I'm trying to market it and trying to make it successful that says, has iron in it. And then on the other side of it, I slap another label that says, will aid in hydration better than any other, water on the market. I'm actually allowed to say something like that because that's not an official nutrition claim. And it's true that it does have iron in it. Like, I'm telling the truth on that label, no matter how I'm presenting it as shadily as possible. I'll give you a really good example, and they've fixed this ever since, but Lenny and Larry cookies, who we all love, right? We all love Lenny and Larry cookies. They're the protein cookies that are delicious and, packed full of protein. And they've fixed this since, but take a look here. You can see here's an old nutrition label versus the new one. You'll notice 16 grams of protein per cookie. Then over here, 8 grams of protein per cookie. Wait, is that? Oh, that's the smaller cookie. Whoops. All right, well, I still get to show what I want to show. All right, so 16 grams of protein per cookie, right? And it says 8 grams of fiber per cookie. Now, they don't have their sugar listed on here, but let's take a look at the nutrition labels, right? Oh, it doesn't say it anymore. Yeah, they have fixed their labeling ever since. I want to find an old label. Come on, hook me up. Okay, well, here's somebody who has broken it down, actually. They used to put on the front how many calories were per serving, and they used to put how many grams of protein were per cookie. And so it's kind of a messed up thing to do because you look at it and it says, calories label. Come on. All right, well, here's somebody who made an article. I don't like using other people's graphics too much, but what they used to do is there used to be like a picture that said 180 calories and then it said per serving. And then over here it says 16 grams of protein per cookie. And so when you look at it, you think that you're seeing, oh, this is a cookie that has, this many calories in it and has this much protein in it. But no. There are 2 servings per cookie. You're actually getting twice. Yeah. So you're actually only getting like, half as many calories. You're getting twice as many calories and half as much protein as you're sort of perceiving when you read that label.
It took me a long time to figure that out. And then when I did, it was like, what? I've been eating the whole cookie? Oh my God.
Totally. When you eat the whole cookie, you're getting 2 servings. So, you would look at, here we go. So on the front of the label, it used to have this picture that said 180 calories per serving. And then it said 16 grams of protein per cookie. And so what that did is that gave you the perception that every time you were paying attention to one or the other. They fixed that ever since. Like they listen to people. Lenny and Larry, they're a decent enough company, I think. They listened to people when they started complaining about that. But like that's the thing about nutrition labeling. Now the FDA, they don't care about how misleading something is. They care about whether or not you are straight up lying. You are allowed to mislead people all day in the eyes of the FDA. You are not allowed to lie, though. So at least there's something. We'll take what we can get, I guess. I don't think that makes them shady, by the way. I just think that that's a clearly defined list of laws. We want to change it. Well, we can change the laws. So your quality is going to be evaluated by the presence of like specific ingredients. When your nutrition facts label, by the way, is present when you look at it, what you are going to see, I'm going to blow this up here. You are going to see the serving size. That is the #1 thing you should pay attention to first at any label. Because a lot, like looking at those cookies, for instance, like when you look at the serving size was 1/2 cookie. Who eats 1/2 cookie? Right? So then you need to sometimes pay attention to the servings per container. So this is 1 slice. Servings per container is 20. That probably means this is like probably a slice of bread. Oh yeah. 1 gram of fat, 15 grams of carbohydrates. So all of this is per serving, right? Not like, you know, if the serving size was 1/2 slice, it's not per slice, it's per serving. So that's definitely something to pay attention to when we look at the nutrition facts panel. Now, if you go to the ingredients list, which of course is not on here, ingredients list bread. I'm going to use, take a look at the ingredients list here. So there is going to be unbleached enriched flour. So immediately we know that this is flour that has had something added to it in order to increase like its levels of, and then it will actually tell you. So wheat flour, malted barley, niacin. So they added B vitamins to that bread. Reduced iron, they added iron to the bread. They added thiamine, which is another B vitamin, riboflavin, and folic acid. All of these are B vitamins. So they took this bread, and you know, there's probably some label on it that says like, it'll give you energy. And it's like, yeah, it's carbs. Of course it'll give you energy, but it does have B vitamins in it. It's energy drink bread. Now, this ingredient is first, right? Then it goes to the next ingredient, which is water, honey, sugar, wheat gluten, whole wheat, rye flour, 2% less of like yeast, soy flour, salt, soybean oil, things like that. Monoglycerides, so those are actually adding a little bit of fat there. Enzymes, ascorbic acid, wheat flour, vinegar, calcium sulfate, mono, calcium phosphate, soy lecithin, and calcium carbonate. So adding some calcium. So we're probably going to see that this food, if you were to look at like the front of this label, it would probably be a bread that says, you know, enriched with calcium, fortified with vitamins and minerals, you know, or it might say good source of calcium. It might have like a lot of different things on the front of this bread. I don't think that's necessarily all that bad, but we do need to be aware that this is a very highly processed type of bread. Now, when it comes to reading these labels, this ingredient is first because it is the #1 ingredient found inside of that food. So your nutrition ingredients label goes in order of how much of whatever ingredient is found first. So there is the thing that there is the most of in this bread is enriched flour. The next most common thing found is going to be water. Then there's a lot of honey. Then there's a lot of sugar. Then there's a lot of wheat gluten. So it goes in order of greatest to least, and that is the order of things that you will find. Here's a different one: wheat flour, water, high fructose corn syrup. So this is an unenriched bread, although we'll probably still find some at the end here. Yep, calcium carbonate, sodium stearate. And by the way, calcium carbonate, like when you see something like that and you're like, oh God, I don't know what that is, and you want to stay away from it, that's not necessarily the most unhealthy thing in the world. It's just a little bit of calcium and a little bit of carbon, right? Those are both things that you need in your diet. But it's when it's been processed and then added back in that your body doesn't process it the same way. And this is why processed foods are typically thought to be like less healthy than unprocessed foods, because your body, you know, but it doesn't mean that those ingredients are dangerous for you. A lot of times we'll see things on nutrition labels that immediately make us step back and be like, oh, that must be dangerous. You know what the most common chemical that you consume every single day is, guys? I got to make sure I don't screw this. You never actually call it this. Dihydrogen monoxide. This is the most common ingredient. This is the most common chemical that you consume every single day. Dihydrogen monoxide is just a big fancy way of saying water. Di for 2, that's 2 hydrogen molecules. Mono for 1, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, H2O. So don't just get freaked out by big scary names. Doesn't necessarily means that's always bad for you. Yeah, this is so funny. 100% of people are exposed to dihydrogen monoxide will die. That's true. Everybody's gonna die, except for Walt Disney, who's frozen. All serial killers have admitted to use dihydrogen. Yeah, that's probably true as well. They're alive. They've drank water. You know, like there's a funny little meme that kind of shows like that sometimes we overreact to nutrition labels. Um, but like, you know, you just want to make yourself aware. Um, Not everything is bad for you. That's where MSG came from. People are like, oh, it's a chemical. It's bad for you. It's just sodium and an amino acid. That's all it is. So these are the things they have to put on those labels. Serving size, servings per container, calories. They do have to put calories from fat, which is kind of silly, to be honest. That's one that I don't think is all that important. That's because we're still living in a world that's like afraid of fat. But remember, fat is really important. However, one of the things I love that they do, they put total fat, they put saturated fat, and then they have to list trans fat. Trans fat is so bad for you. I know that I'm contradicting myself. I know I told you guys I don't like to tell people what not to eat. The one thing I like to tell people not to eat is trans fat. Stay away from that crap. It is bad for you. Cholesterol, sodium, total carbs, fiber, and sugars, which is really handy. Proteins, vitamins, and minerals. And then they do have to put a little bit of footnotes on like calorie conversion, which I guess is important, although, you know, most of your clients don't even know what that means anyways. But that is calorie conversion there. We've also got percent daily value. That's going to help determine like how much generally people need in a day, right? Again, those are based on the adequate intake levels, right? So when we look at food, right, here's an example. It might have 65 grams of fat. Well, 20 of those are saturated. So you are left to assume, and it has to list trans fat, so you are left to assume that the remaining 45 grams are from unsaturated fat sources, which we know are generally healthy fats. We like unsaturated fat, right? Protein, cholesterol, carbohydrates, fiber, and sodium. Now, these are, I was reading that as if this is a nutrition label. That's actually not true. These are the general recommendations for these things in a day. 50 grams of protein is pretty much as much protein as most people need. And that's because, like, you know, based on 2,000 calorie diet. Now, me, in order to maintain my muscle mass, which you can see is going swimmingly, I have to consume 3,200 calories per day. That is my stay the same number of calories, which is why these numbers totally don't apply to me. So if I were to look at like the 10% rule and be like, oh, I'm getting 10% of my protein in per day. No, that is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Generally, women need less calories than men. Generally, most people are sedentary. Because, by the way, 3,200 is only because I'm very active. If I live like a normal day where I just like lounge on the couch, you know, go to work, don't really work out or do anything like that, I'm only burning like 2,400, 2,500 calories in a day. It's still definitely higher, but now you imagine like a sedentary individual, right? Maybe like a sedentary female who's burning maybe 1,300 calories a day at their baseline, and then like, you know, moving around, living an active, normal, everyday life, that becomes like 1,500 calories, 1,600 calories in a day. You average out 22 plus 16, comes out to around 2,000. So that's why this is the general number. But honestly, like this is going to disappear soon. You know, this is not actually helping that many people. Beware of nutrient content claims such as low fat, reduced sugar, high in fiber. None of those things are clearly defined, right? Now, if it said 40 grams of fiber, that's a number, right? That is clearly defined. But if we see high in fiber, higher than 0, sure, they're allowed to say that. And so that's where, again, it can get misleading sometimes, right? So these things only need to be included on nutrition labels in order to meet certain required like criteria. So one of the good ones is actually organic. Nutrition label. nutrition sticker. There we go. So you are allowed, this is what might sound a little weird. You are allowed to do this, where you put the word organic on your thing. It says organic protein, right? I'm allowed to put the word organic anywhere I want as long as it has organic ingredients in it. It does not need to be 100% organic. I can just call it organic, you know, as long as it has organic ingredients. But there is one sticker in particular. There we go. Made with organic ingredients, right? Doesn't mean that it's 100% organic, although if you were to look at that, you might think that it is. This sticker right here, 100% organic, that is actually means that it needs to be 100% organic. They do have to be truthful there, but there is one in particular that I'm looking for. USDA organic sticker. This one right here is the one that you really want to look for. This USDA organic sticker, that means that 95% of it is organic. They're allowed to say it's 100%. Like they're allowed to, but they do actually, like, just so that we're all aware, they do actually allow for like a 5% error, which is more than they need. Like, you know, 5% is actually a lot. But basically the reason they allow for that error is because, like, you know, if some random pesticide from another farmer's crop flew through the air and they tested for it and it's like, you have pesticides, and it's like, whoa, 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 no, we do not. And it's like, well, we found, you know, 0.0001%, and it's like, okay, it is true that it's in there, but we don't, you know, so like they have to allow for that, otherwise people would be getting sued literally every day. So when it says like USDA organic, it doesn't actually mean 100%, but what it means versus what it represents is unimportant. So then we have other health claims, you know, calcium and osteoporosis. We do know that there's a link, so they are allowed to say, like, because it has high levels of calcium in it, they're allowed to say something like it's good for your bones. They're allowed to do stuff like that. That's not illegal. It's low in sodium. We do know that high sodium intake is associated with like hypertension, so they're allowed to say may lower your risk for hypertension. Sure. We know that like fiber reduces your cholesterol, right? Which is why Cheerios are allowed to say we're heart healthy, because there's a lot of fiber in certain types of Cheerios. So these are all like labels that they are allowed to say. We need to be aware of them, but we also need to be a little bit cautious and, you know, worry of them, right? We need to be like aware of the fact that they're allowed to say these things because things that are found in them are associated with that, right? Milk is associated with calcium, and calcium is associated with bone density. Doesn't necessarily mean just by drinking plenty of milk, you're gonna have healthy bones, right? But they're allowed to say stuff like that because it's not, the way I like to put it is that's not untrue, right? Which is not the same as saying that's true, right? I didn't say the same thing there. So we need to be able to kind of like assess this. One of the other ways that we're going to get into later on, we're going to look at like when we are giving somebody nutrition advice, we have to be able to assess like, are they ready to actually take that advice? And so this is where when you are becoming like a nutrition coach, you need to make sure that like you are avoiding what we call professional dictatorship, which means, Maggie, you have to eat this because I said so, right? I'm your trainer. I'm putting my reputation on the line by working with you, right? Don't do that. It might work for a little while, you know, it actually, you know, it does work. But the problem with it is the fact that, you know, your client isn't taking ownership over their change. And so they're likely to revert back to old habits. So we'll be looking at that as we go on. So in summary, sports nutrition, we have to have a command of general nutrition information. We need to know which foods and beverages contain all of the essential nutrients, where we're getting our energy from, and a little bit about our RDAs and DRIs. And most importantly, we need to know how to use the MyPlate, because we can teach people how to use the MyPlate all freaking day. And that's it, guys. That's all I got for you. How you feeling?
Good.
Questions, comments, concerns? All to you?
No, not right now. No.
All right, guys.
This is kind of like I did some sort of nutrition when I was with Debbie a little bit, so this is kind of like a refresher. But I know we talked a lot about like the same stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we actually. Yeah. That's interesting. When did you talk? Oh, you know what? You probably talked about it in the next mod. That's right. We do a little bit of nutrition in anatomy and phys. I was like, when did you talk about nutrition?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this. We're gonna go over it for the next this whole class, and then you're gonna get another nutrition class in capstone. So that's
cool.
in the capstone, but they're kind of different. Like this is like foundational nutrition knowledge. Capstone is like, here's how to pass your nutrition test. So they're different classes for sure.
Okay. Cool.
But, all right, guys. I will see you guys.
All right, bro. All right. See you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.